Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. I don't know if you can see very well behind me, but we got some snow. Of course, it is still winter. It is the beginning of February at the time of recording this. And while there are some things that we can do to prepare for the 2026 garden season, it's a little bit of a lull right now while we're just waiting for seed starting. So I thought it'd be kind of fun to take a look at the seeds I grew from 2025, pick out my top 10 varieties, not necessarily the same type of variety, but just my top 10 favorite things I grew and rank them. The ones that I picked out a couple different tomatoes. So I picked out a Sun Gold cherry tomato, the Supremo tomato. I picked out the cabbage Caraflex, standard zucchini, scarlet kale, dragon tongue bush beans, my absolute favorite pepper shishito, some basil lettuce leaf, some French breakfast radishes, and some okra Clemson spineless. So let's take a look and see how they rank compared to each other, but just to itself as well. All right, let's rank some of these vegetables. So to start us off, let's talk a little bit about the Sun Gold tomato. The Sun Gold was a brand new variety for me to grow in 2025. It is a cherry tomato variety. It's pole cherry, so that means it's indeterminate. It's a heavy producer. And it has a very unique kind of sweet, almost umami tasting tomato when you have it. So one of the reasons why I got it is it's a fan favorite among other gardeners. And like I said, it's supposed to be a heavy producer. Now, my experience last year growing this, I had issues with squirrels as far as pests go. Otherwise, little to no pest pressure. If I could have controlled the squirrels, I think it would have been a super awesome producer for the whole garden. But it did pick up for me, I'd say late summer when the squirrels finally let off, they actually started producing a bunch of tomatoes. So flavor wise, it was delicious. And as far as producing, it was, like I said, a heavy producer, very, very big clusters. I'm going to go ahead and rank this as an S tier tomato. We'll set it right there. So what about the other tomato? So the other one I had was the Supremo Roma. This is an indeterminate tomato, meaning that it's a bush variety. It doesn't get super big, which was really nice. I was able to grow these in some grow pots, which was also really nice. What wasn't nice, again, was the squirrels. I think if I could take the squirrels out of the equation, I'll be able to rank this better. Flavor profile wise, definitely up there. I thought it was highly productive. Didn't quite have enough to do any kind of canning or preserving, but again, that kind of goes back to my issue with squirrels. Pest pressure, there really wasn't any. Of course, it did get hit with a little bit of powdery mildew. In fact, so did the Sun Golds. But I mean, that's a tomato for you here in Zone 6B. We have a lot of humidity, so it doesn't surprise me that any tomato plant that we put out in the garden is going to get hit with that. However, the Supremo was, like I said, it did really well for me. Heavy producer, lots and lots of fruit, delicious, compact, definitely up here in my S tier. Shishito peppers. I feel like this is another S tier. These are all like that I plan on planting every year, so it's gonna be one of those things like, do I just rank them all S tier? No, I think the shishitos. Here's the thing with the shishitos, they are insanely prolific. We only had, I think, 2, maybe 3 plants, and I don't know how many dozens and dozens of peppers I was picking off of this plant. It didn't struggle from any pests. There was little to zero sun scalding happening on the peppers or the leaves. And like I said, it was just insanely prolific. Definitely going to go ahead and rank this another S tier. Okra. Okay, so I have the Clemson spineless okra. This has been one of my go-tos that I grow every year. I would say that, in terms of ranking this, it does really well up against pests. I haven't seen any issues with with like bugs or insects. Obviously, the squirrels leave it alone. Hummingbirds love the flowers. There's really nothing bad to say about it. The only downside for me, and we get hot summers here, so okra definitely does well here, but it can be a little on the slow side to get started. And it can also be one of those crops that if you're not growing more than a handful of plants, you're not going to get a lot from them. So the way that okra grows, it'll put off a flower maybe once a day, and then that turns into a pod. And so you really need to think about the space to plant the okra. So unlike a tomato plant where I could plant one sun gold or one supremo or one pepper, and that's going to give me a ton of harvest, okra, I really have to be intentional about planting several and making sure I have the space for it. Now, if I have several planted, you'll get it. I got a great harvest last year. And so that's kind of my takeaway for this, is just making sure that there are a lot of things planted. So I'm going to go ahead and list this as an A because of the fact that you do have to make sure you have several okra planted in order to get a robust harvest. Okay, let's talk about cabbages. So I picked the Careflex cabbage. Now I've only grown a couple different varieties, the Red Acre and the Careflex. I did attempt to grow Brunswick a couple years ago, but it just didn't happen for me. This year I was pleasantly surprised by the Careflex. It was a compact cabbage. It didn't take up as much space as I think some of the bigger rounder cabbages. This is kind of a funnel shaped cabbage. You can see in the image here. A lot of fun to grow. It's a little unique, a little different, but it definitely got hit by pests. So obviously we were dealing with a lot of the white moths, so the cabbage moths with the little green worms. Also, I believe they were cutworms. There was some larger brown ones. And so being able to go in and either keep them covered or go in and hand pick them was really vital. I did start using some organic sprays on it, which did help as well, but just making sure to stay on top. So these were definitely hit by pests. The other thing is, you only get one cabbage for one plant, and it takes quite a ways to harvest it. So you're looking at about 75 days turnaround to get a head of cabbage. The size of the heads were decent, so we could do maybe a couple meals from one head, whereas if you had a larger variety, you could probably get even more from that. So just because of that, I'm going to go ahead and log it as a B tier. Again, I'm prefacing all of these things in here today are ones that I love and that I will grow repeatedly until I find a better variety. But in terms of ranking them just as they are, I'm going to rank that as a B. Let's talk about radishes. So one of my go-tos, and I think every gardener should be growing radishes because they're just really a fulfilling little seed to grow because they germinate quickly, they grow quickly, they're quick to harvest, and they can be somewhat versatile in the kitchen. So if you aren't a big fan of radishes, I would recommend trying to roast them in the oven because every vegetable roasted, every anything roasted is better in the oven. But the French breakfast in particular, I don't know if it's just my imagination, but I do feel like these are a more subtle radish flavor, so they're not really spicy. They aren't, real potent or pungent. If you do want to like chop them up and put them in a salad, they're really pretty. They have, a lovely coloring to them. They're a lot of fun to grow. So definitely, I think I'm going to put this in the S tier just because of the fact that, again, super easy to grow. I've never had any issues with pests with these. If there is any downside, actually, you know what? Let's talk about downsides for a moment because maybe this doesn't go in the S tier. Downsides is they are finicky when it comes to any kind of heat. So if you get like a planting late spring and you have warmer weather, sometimes radishes will tend to bolt very quickly. They'll get really spindly. So you do have a particular window to plant these, either early spring, maybe fall, to actually get the harvest. So I'm going to move these from S to A because of that. Otherwise, they are definitely, like I said, one of my favorites to grow. All right, next up is the basil. So I do grow a number of different kinds of basil in the garden. I have the Genovese basil. I've got the Tulsi basil or holy basil. I have purple basil, lemon basil, cinnamon basil, you name it, I've got it in the format of a basil, I'm sure. But last year was the first year I grew this lettuce leaf basil, and the reason why is it is very similar to the Genovese. So a Genovese basil is going to be kind of your standard culinary basil. You find it a lot in a lot of cuisines, a lot of Italian cuisine, salads, think caprese salad. That's going to be your Genovese basil. Now, I don't have any problems growing Genovese, but the lettuce leaf is essentially a Genovese, but a larger leaf. And so it quickly became one of my favorites over the other types of basil. The nice thing with this is, like I said, the leaves are huge, they're massive. You could do things like almost like a lettuce wrap with these leaves if you wanted to. Otherwise, you know, a little goes a long way. In terms of growth and pest pressure, I didn't have any problems when it came to pests, and it grows like any other basil that you might grow. So if you prune it back, you can get it to bush out more and so forth. It stayed pretty compact. It didn't get really tall or spindly. It didn't go to flower real quickly. For example, the Tulsi basil sometimes like goes to flower really fast, whereas this lettuce leaf, it seemed to hang around a little bit more. So for that, I am going to go ahead and rank that as S. Zucchini. Nothing flashy. The one I've grown in the past is Ford Hook zucchini. It's kind of your standard zucchini. My seeds are from Rare Seed or Baker Creek. You can get them from Walmart. You can different vendors have this variety. There's a lot of other varieties out there. I haven't tried the other ones, just this one. Here's the thing. I adore and love zucchini. Every year I will grow zucchini. However, the pests love zucchini as well. And here in Missouri, we really struggle with squash bugs and vine borer. Vine borer, not so much with the zucchini. They do occasionally. They'll target this down by kind of the roots and the stem. These squash bugs, they can decimate a plant very quickly. And so until I find a variety that maybe is more disease resistant, definitely gonna rank this low on my list here today. But like I said, zucchini is one of my absolute favorites. I love it for cooking. It's so versatile. I could eat, you know, zucchini every day in the summer if I had that in my kitchen. The problem is I don't. So I think I could count on my hand the amount of zucchini I picked last year. It was terrible. Terrible year for zucchini. Definitely have to stay on top of the pests for this one. If you can get it to grow, they can be very prolific. However, like I said, it's very much a gamble if you're not on top of pest pressure. I am going to rank this as a D. Sorry, zucchini, I love you. But until the squash bugs find something else, I'm gonna have to rank you low. Maybe I'll find a different variety in the future though. Who knows? This is a very close-up shot of the scarlet kale. So out of all of the different varieties of kale, I have found that the scarlet variety is my favorite. It is a curly leaf kale variety. It has some purple stems. If you're lucky, the purple will also expand onto the leaves. Generally, when I grow it, it's always been kind of just a really dark green. I do wonder if there is something to do with soil health and maybe a change in acidity, if that could alter the color of the leaves. I haven't looked that up. Be curious to know if that's the case. I have found, like I said, I really like this particular kale. It does really well for us. All kale varieties have been really prolific for me. This one just seems to be a little bit more versatile, I think, with cooking. It does really nicely for young, tender leaves. If you let the leaves mature, and you could do different dishes by sauteing it or baking it. Overall, a really lovely kale. The only problem with the kale, and this kind of goes back to the cabbages, is that there are definitely pests that hit these. So I love a good leafy green, but the cabbage moths love it as well. So With the kale, generally I'm hand picking these every other day out in the garden, or I am netting them with some insect netting. Now, if I can keep the worms at bay, these leaves are beautiful. Otherwise, they often will have some holes in them just from pest pressure. Still edible, still delicious, but I am going to go ahead and put this in the B category right next to those cabbages. Again, also get hit from the same type of pests. Okay, last on my list of top 10s are the dragon tongue bush beans. So this variety is a particular variety of bush bean. It is one of my favorite varieties to plant because for a couple reasons. One, they're really beautiful in the garden when they come in, and they've got these beautiful variegated pods that have a splash of purple on them. And then the other reason, not only are they adding this kind of ornamental factor into the garden, but they're adding a practical factor when it comes to picking them. They are exceptionally easy to spot when you have pods that are ready. So they are definitely one of my go-tos. I have grown other types of bush beans. I haven't had any huge issues with any of my bush beans when it comes to pests, but this one's my favorite because of the fact that they are, very pretty pods. They're very easy to pick out of the garden and harvest. They taste great. Now, when you do cook these, the purple cooks away and it just becomes a solid green pod, but they cook up well, freeze well, very versatile. They're not stringy or anything like that. I am going to go ahead and rank these as an A. Not an S because of the fact that one little bean will be somewhat prolific, but not as prolific as other beans that I have planted. So that is the downside to the dragon tongue bush beans. I've found it could just be my soil health, but they just haven't been as prolific as the blue lake bush beans and some of the other varieties out there that are, I think, intended mostly for canning and preserving. We don't do any canning and preserving here in this household, at least not at this time. So having a bush bean that's not highly prolific is fine with me, especially if they taste yummy and they look beautiful in the garden. All right, guys, this is my tiered list of my top 10 favorite varieties to grow in the garden. Obviously, my top 10 varieties are going to be ranked pretty high. Maybe this is a skewed result, but this is how I feel about these varieties. Really wish I could have ranked zucchini up there higher. Until I find a better variety, that's where that one's going. Otherwise, most of these are pretty solid performers. Some of them, like I said, have some issues with pests. Some of them aren't as productive as, the others, and that's just the nature of the variety and of the vegetable. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this little video. Let me know if you would rank these differently, and if I should do another video like this in the future. I think it would be fun after the 2026 garden season to rank some of the peppers, because I'm going to be planting several more varieties of peppers this year than I have in the past, as well as tomatoes. I think it would be great to break down all of those and just see how they performed for me. Until next time, take care. Thanks for watching. Bye.